Hey there. Welcome to this Ask Me Anything session. We're going to talk about diverse teams today with special guest Carl Varnado. He's chair of Black in Gaming, an educator, and a regular GDC speaker. I think you've been giving talks for 5, 10, 15 years, right?
About 5 years, yeah.
Nice.
I've been at GC attendee since the 2000s, but yeah.
Mm. So
Mhm.
you outlasted me.
Yeah.
So we're going to sort of have like a general discussion here for about a half hour. We got a chat that's filling up right now. Folks in chat, we're going to ask your questions to Carl. He's had lots of experience in games and has a lot of things to say about it. So please just ask whatever questions come to mind, especially about, diversity in game development, inclusion, upvote questions if you like them, and we'll get them over. So while we get started, Carl, can you fill folks in on sort of what you've been doing in your career in games?
So I had a game studio in 2003, 2007 in Chicago. I left and went to the film industry for a couple of years, and I worked in film industry. And I went into education, so started teaching kids how to make games and video games, films, animation, stuff like that. And so I've been active in the game industry as an activist. I helped Black in Games start Black in Games in 2005 and been a part of that organization on and off since. And then I became the chair in 2014. And so I'm all about getting African Americans more prominent, more education, more industry access in the game industry.
Right on. As you wait to get some questions here, I think the first thing that jumps to mind is I want to know how you've seen the industry change in this specific regard. Over the last 5 years at least. Like, have you seen any significant changes, positively or negatively?
For diversity or for Black people in gaming?
Seeing Black people in gaming specifically represented among gaming
Black people have always been in gaming between 1% to 2% for the last 35 years. Like the number has not changed significantly. The game industry itself has expanded. So because the game industry itself has expanded, there are more African Americans in the game industry, but percentage wise, we still hover between the 1% to 2% dynamic. As far as like access to the industry, a little better, not a whole lot better. I would say companies have struggled to understand how to recruit African Americans into the game industry. There are several organizations they could be looking at, like NSBE, National Association of Black Engineers. They seem unaware of them or going to historically Black colleges, and so there's just a lack of response to making the teams more diverse in that regard. As far as how the industry actually works, one of the big issues that we've seen is retention. Retaining African Americans in the game industry has been a big challenge because of the work environments have not been from what I understand, not as welcoming as they should be.
Mm. Yeah, I specifically would love to dig into that because I think one of the main things I want to get into here is not just getting more Black folks, Black and brown folks into the game industry at all levels, but keeping them there rather than sort of churning through them. I think there's still a lot of, there's a lot of work to be done in all corners of the industry, but especially in designing systems in studios and in companies that keep people feeling included, that keep people feeling they're part of the team, and sort of just minimize the level of and the amount of microaggressions that people who don't fit in with a company culture often deal with on a daily basis. So yeah, like how do you think people who work in games, specifically at like sort of levels of power, whether it's, seniority and such, how can they better design game companies and game teams to sort of keep people on the team who have diverse perspectives, whether they're Black developers, brown developers?
Human beings have a tendency, right? So like when we are successful in something, we think that the duplication of that successful pattern is the way to keep being successful, right? So like, let's say you make a really great, magnificent game, and it was 20 of you and your friends in a basement for 15 months, and you worked 60 hours a week to do it, and you made it, right? And then it becomes wildly successful, right? Then you're able to get VC money and make a company, right? You think in your mind that the thing you did to make that game successful is the duplicatable thing you should do to make the next game successful, right? So then you create what's called crunch, right? You create these ideas that pattern has to be duplicated again and again to make new games, rather than think that was a dysfunctional system that we did in the heat of the moment to make that one game. Now, how do we create a culture that allows that to be sustainable over time, right? But we don't do it that way. We make it a provable model, right? So then we put everybody else through this system of callousness so that they prove their worth, right? And so then that particular kind of development then only seeks to serve a certain kind of person. People in their 20s, people that are male, because people that are female are not going to work 60 hours a week with men late at night. That's not safe. People that have a certain kind of cultural background, right? Because they can afford to do that. And people that are that get along in after hours environments, right? So you start creating this culture of an advantage, right? Because you start to look for people who have exactly the same cultural understanding as you do, right? And that's not only racial, right? So then you look for who went to the same school as me, who went to the same, who plays the same games as me, who's going to go to a lounge at 11:30 at night and play a game late at night with me, right? You start looking at all these cultural connections that you deem as worthy of being part of the team, right? So when then your HR department, as you get bigger and bigger, your HR department expands the team. When somebody comes in and says, this is an odd way to do business, you feel offended by their approach, right? You feel offended that they are now encroaching upon your culture, right? Mm-hmm. Rather than saying this person may have a different perspective or healthier way of looking at this, right? For instance, the game industry is not welcoming to parents, right? Or because they think, you have to work all day long. But parents might want to take off at 2 and come back at 6, right? Because the important time for parents is pick up with kids, homework, stuff like that. So there's things that you could do as a game industry that could be very, very inclusive, but you think of it in a way of, follow my pattern. My pattern is the correct way to do it.
Mm-hmm. And that way you create like a self-sustaining and sort of exclusionary system.
Yes.
And we got to break that system. A lot of questions in here in chat about how we're going to do that. I want to get to some real quick. Right here at the top of the list, Yusuf asks, when it comes to portrayal of one's ethnicity in video games, how does one who is on a lower level express their disapproval of mixed representation? For example, I'm Arab and I really dislike being constantly portrayed as a terrorist, understandably.
So he's asking internally in his company, he wants to address a stereotype in the company that he thinks is portrayed not negatively.
Yeah, it sounds go ahead, please.
So the way I would think about that would be 3 ways. The first is I would find a bunch of articles that support your point of view, right? Like this is the way I find an article on actual stereotypes. I find research about how that portrays people in the news, and I send that information to my immediate supervisors and say, hey, I want you to be aware of how this will affect the game to this particular group of people because it can affect sales, right? Mm-hmm. The second way is then to go to them personally and explain to his point of view and explain how it affects them personally, right? The third way is, as important as 3 others, right, is to have a general discussion with the team about why this particular character has to be this particular thing, right? There are plenty of ethnicities that can be terrorists, right? Why does it have to be a Muslim? And also flip it, right? So is the main character a standard James Bond character? And could that be the Muslim character, right? And so then give them another sense of, hey, why are we let's flip the whole scenario on its head. Let's make the Muslim guy the hero, make the other guy the terrorist, right? And then suddenly that has creative interest. Oh, well, how do we do that? And have all these questions will come up, right? So kind of go all 3. So address first the audience issue, then address the personal issue, and address the creative issue. You got to address all 3. Otherwise, you get pushed back behind your back secretly, in my opinion.
Yeah. Do you think it's important to make a business case as well, or is that sort of beyond the scope of an individual employee?
You could make a business case. I think it'd be difficult in his position because he says he's a junior person, and that might not be his scope of ability. So I think he makes it if he says it affects the audience because he can prove that, and that's why you show articles because there's he's got scholarly research you can find that shows negative portrayals of stereotypes in society, how they affect people's attitudes toward them and stuff like that. Once he gets in the business case, he's going to balance somebody from an Ivy League school who's going to make another business case why it is important to do it. There you go, my point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, we have another great question here. Actually, a lot of great questions. Thank you all so much. Tanya asks, how does a diverse team create a successful productive and thriving environment as opposed to a non-diverse team? What are the ramifications of not striving to have a diverse team?
Well, there's lots of This is a really complicated question.
Yeah.
So I talk about this quite often, right? So overrepresentation is in this industry problem, right? And overrepresentation is when you have a certain kind of person represented so much in a team that they think that's normal, right? So if you have 8 white guys on a team and then two ethnic guys from a different country, and that's your team, and you think that's industry standard, that's like how it's supposed to work, that's how it's supposed to operate, right? And so then what you have is then lack of diversity of opinion, like a diversity of perspective, like a diversity of approach, like a diversity of audience, like a diversity of a lot of things. And so you fit into all these different ideas of we're going to make what we already know. And so that often is the problem with like diverse teams is they're trying to approach the problem from their perspective, only their perspective, and they become a feeding zone of their own ideas. And they become support systems for the ideas they understand, right? So there's nobody there to come in and say, hey, what about this? What about this idea? Because that gets a negative reaction because they've now set a standard of what they deem is the best team, right? And that standard is a false narrative. They don't know if that's the best team, but they set the standard of that, so they can start it.
Right. I think I also like there is, and this is a preview of GDC Summer Day 3. Tomorrow, King Sabrina Carmona will be giving a talk about how to cultivate more women in leadership in games.
Yes.
And I know there's a bit in there where she happens to mention that there have been studies done that show, companies that have more diverse leadership teams that have women and non-white men are like more successful, measurably so, 15 to 35% more successful, in part because they have a broader range of experiences to draw from and a broader range of perspectives to bring to bear in the market.
On that note, too, if you look at undergraduate programs, marginalized people and women have larger roles in leadership in undergraduate programs. So they usually have more leadership experience coming out of undergraduate schools than most white guys do, even though no one tells you that. Look, go. If you call a campus and ask who are leaders on campus, largely they are underrepresented people because they come there to lead. That's part of their mantra when they get to the school.
Absolutely. Before these get away from us, let's jump to another question here in chat. Jasmine asked a little while ago, I've heard that many game companies have a boys club vibe. Would you share your experience with how exclusive these teams are or aren't? Did you ever not feel welcome?
Yes, there's a couple of things I've been to. There's some exclusive kind of events that once you get to a certain level in the game industry you go to. Yeah. And I've definitely felt targeted at those events sometimes, where somebody's pressing about my credentials or asking why I'm there, or how did you get access to this, or this very strange dynamics to have. There is a boys club, and that goes back, but I think there's two different kinds. There's a boys club and there's a nerds club, which both have their own kind of like weird like rituals to get into, right? So there's definitely a boy vibe where like it's locker room talk or whatever that might do. But there's also like in the nerd club, like you don't fit into this nerd culture, and we're gonna make you feel excluded because we're supposed to be the people in the industry like this. And so I think both of them exclusively do the shout-outs for different kinds of candidates they feel don't belong in those clubs.
Kevin has another good question. He asks, thanks for taking questions, which is just nice to share. He wants to hear, Carl, your take on job requirements and how job requirements can hinder minority job applicants. How can we as applicants better position ourselves in the job market within the games industry?
Oh, as the job applicant.
Yeah. How do you get around that HR wall?
All right. HR walls are interesting. All right. So there's a couple of different ways you can do this, right? So the best advice I ever got for this, I'm going to give you 2 pieces of advice really quick. The best advice I got this was one of my friends who works at Viacom.
Yeah.
And I was at Comic-Con one year, and we were at Key and Peele. We were backstage Key and Peele, right?
Nice.
And we got used to some of the writers for Key and Peele. And the guys that we met were like 25. They couldn't have been more 25. And I was like super salty because I'm a writer. And I'm like, how are they at Key and Peele? Blah, blah, blah. I was mad about it. Like, it's like 7 years ago. So So after drinks, we're talking, and they explained that they took like secretary jobs basically, like for like 6 months, right? And then once they took the secretary job, then they worked their way into the writers' room. Mm. And so when they walked away, my friend goes, "They made the leap," and I go, "What's the leap?" And she says, "They took the job they didn't want to get the job they did want." Mm-hmm. And I was like, "Why would you do that?" She said, "Because then you understand the network." He said, most people make mistakes on is that they don't get into the network first so that they can then appeal to the job they want to do. Mm-hmm. They try to go for the job they want first, not knowing anybody, and then expecting. So then it's all about credentials then, right? So she said, take a job below you first. So go find the company you want, find 3 companies you want, apply to the job there that is the job that gets you in the door. You want to work at the company. Once there, spend all your time trying to figure out how to get out of that job and go to do what you want to do. But do the job well. Do the job super well. Be really, really good at it. And then immediately when a position opens up, find a person that you're talking to. Because once you're in the club, people are more willing to help you. So once you work downstairs and you meet Matt in animation, right? And you have lunch with Matt 20 days in a row, Matt's going to ask you, what do you eventually want to do? And then you're going to I want to be animator. And he's going to okay. And then Matt will tell you at one point, hey, they're looking for storyboard artists in animation. Go talk to Rachel, right? And then suddenly you have an opportunity to do that versus saying, being online, trying to approach and trying to get the storyboard job online without any assistance. The second way is some companies have exams, tests, requirements, all these different things. Spend some time researching the company about the processes of what they require to get in. So that means being on LinkedIn for 6 weeks, hitting people on LinkedIn hey, I want to talk to you about coming to Blizzard. How do I do that? And don't hit them, ask people one question. Don't ask them more than one. Hi, my name is Ron and I'm a student. I'm coming out and I really think Blizzard's a great company. What things about Blizzard do you think would be great? What things about, but you want to ask one question and one question only. Don't waste your time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I want to pop over here to one Bryant Francis, who asked not a long while ago, what are reliable processes for bringing in outside consultants to help talk about cultural identities developers may not know about or not know enough about? He's thinking specifically here about folks like the Hero Heritage Foundation who help Don't Not Make Tell Me Why.
Ask the question again. I didn't quite understand it.
Absolutely. All he wants to know is what are some good processes for bringing in outside consultants to teams who can help them better represent and portray cultural identities and cultural groups they may not have internally?
I got you. That's a really great question.
Yeah. Have you had any experience with that kind of stuff as a consultant yourself?
I've never brought in outside groups for anything I've done, but I say first research who are the experts in that field. And then talk to people that are in those fields and then watch stuff they do and then email the people at the company and once again use LinkedIn and ask them who are the top 5 groups you recommend me to talk about, and then ask those people top 5 and make a list about 15 or 20. Don't stop at the first 5 you find. Go to those groups and find who they study and research and talk to, right? So there's a network of people that are in each area that all have connections in that. So don't stop with the first 5. Have each person recommend 4 or 5 people so you can research them all. And a lot of times you'll find that there's some hidden people in those. People that are really good at research, sometimes are really bad at marketing, right? So if you're going to think about, well, I'm going to go to the person that has the best website, that usually is the person that's best at marketing it, right? The person that's really good at researching all that stuff is probably reading a book. They're not on social media, right? So you have to kind of do some digging to find those people.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right. Yeah. There's been a few questions about games specifically. I've tried to keep this mostly to game teams, but Tony had a good question for a little while ago. Maybe you want to take a break and talk about which current games do you feel do a good job of portraying the realities of diversity and which ones handle that poorly?
That's a really difficult question to answer. Which games do a good job? Because that's a wide open question. Games There's lots of games that really do a good job of like avatar creation. Like that's a great way to think about like diversity in some respects.
Yeah.
But the games that portray cultures, like actually portray different cultures. There's Orion, Legend of Korra, which is a great African-based choreography, which is really based on African mythology. That's a fantastic game. I think Black and Gaming gave it an award this year. Nice. That's a really, really good one. There's a I can't think of the name of the game. It's a Streets of Rage clone. That's really hilarious.
Treachery in Beatdown City.
Treachery in Beatdown City. That's a really great game.
Alexander Allen.
Yep. I love. It's a hilarious like game that Momo created. It's about hair slapping. It's hilarious. Like it's about people touching your hair. Yeah. There's some really good like there's some really games coming up. I know Jabari Ali is really doing some really cool things with his new game coming out. That's like doing 4 months, and he's released I think an alpha for it. There's a couple of great ones for AAA studios. I mean, obviously, like Miles Morales' Spider-Man is gonna be great. Like it's coming on PlayStation. Yeah. I really like what Horizon Dawn has done with the female protagonist in that game. Like that's a really good representation thing. The issue here, though, is if you're only 2% of the industry, and you're not in positions of power in the industry, then it's tough because nobody in decision-making capabilities is a person that has the power to say, we're going to take these cultural milestones, put them in the game. So now everybody's in the guy's position to ask a question earlier is you're arguing up, right? So if you want better representation, you have to put people in power and position that can then fight for those decision-making situations.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of calls back to what we were talking about earlier about the importance of having diverse leadership teams. Do you have any sort of contemporary thoughts on how marginalized folks, Black folks, other folks can get and keep jobs in the higher roles of game development where they can actually exercise that kind of power?
Ooh, so my thought would be this. So the first approach to it is to think about, all right, does this person have capability to run a team, right? And that's usually yes, right? Because they wouldn't be in your situation if they weren't capable of running a team, right? The second question then is, do I trust them to run the team, right? And so if those two are the answer you have and you're in charge, that should be the end of your conversation, right?
Yeah.
What happens too often is you look for fit. And fit is the easiest way to disqualify minority from a team because it gives people a weird amount of power in decision-making without reason, right? So I can just say, I don't really feel it and not give you a reason why. I don't really think it's a good fit. And they're saying is they're uncomfortable with this person being in the role, right? But that person's going to be uncomfortable because you're now asking them to be in a role they're not used to serving in. They're not maybe used to serving this kind of this person being in charge of them. They're not used to this kind of person having power over them. They're not used to this person serving. So don't take the fit discussion out of your questioning. If you believe as the people that are in charge that this person has capability and can do the job, that should be the end of the discussion, right? Because then you have to tell the team, look, if it's not a good fit, then you need to move on. Mm-hmm. But imagine, and this is something I think I'm going to tell the audience real. Imagine that you're going into a position where you're going to supervise people, right? And they have the power before you get hired and after you get hired to tell your boss that you're not a good fit and you need to go on. That's such a disempowering idea. The person in charge hired you to do the job, but the people under you have a card to play constantly because they have the team to say, yeah, just not feeling it, right? And that can't work. If you want to succeed, you got to give them autonomy.
Yeah, I think you're right. So I kind of want to stay on the topic of hiring real quick and maybe.
Sure.
Yeah, it is frustrating to have people say, well, we would have more diverse teams if more diverse people would apply. Because that's BS. It's on people who hire to hire good, diverse candidates. But if folks who are hiring maybe really don't know where to look and are having a hard time. Pat in chat asks, can you direct us to a list of resources for hiring? For example, you mentioned the Society of Black Engineers. Knowing some of the best places to reach out or post would be really helpful. Do you have any suggestions?
Yes. All right. So once again, if you're about programming, National Society of Black Engineers, there's 10,000 members of that. There's you can find an engineer, somebody who's computer engineering with that group. If you want to get more diverse artists, right, start on ArtStation. Look at Comic-Con situations. Look at look at people that are trying to do 3D art. Lots of people the people that are coming from African Americans are. This is the first thing to start here. Okay, let's start right here. The African Americans who are applying to the game industry are doing so in a way that is against the culture that they come from, right? It's hard to explain to your parents who invested, I don't know how many $1,000s into your education, that you're going to leave and not go into banking because you're going to do video games, right? So this is a person who's already rebelling against the system, right? Sometimes they're coming from very small communities, right? They don't have a team around them that can do their art, can do their music, can do all of that stuff. This maybe one or two people coming from that environment, right? So the first part of that is to understand that you're looking for somebody sometimes that's alone, right? So your first job is to make them feel welcome to even apply to your organization. They may be intimidated. I can't possibly work at Sony. I can't possibly work at. You have to be encouraging. Like, yeah, you can. I've seen your art. It's amazing. Go ahead and apply, right? Yeah. Like, that's the first part. The second part is get off of the Berkeley Stanford horse. Like, game industry, you are enamored with these schools. You have to stop if you want to diversify your pool, right? Look at some HBCUs down south. Look at some of the schools across the country. There is a lie in the industry that is pervasive. And the pervasive thing in the industry is you have these litmus tests to get into a company that once they're in, they're going to get retrained anyway. Like, what are you doing? Like, if you don't even need the information to apply to work, why is the information so important when you apply, right? So if you know as a hiring manager, they're going to retrain them for 3 months anyway, right? Throw away the wheel. Okay, what are you looking for as far as personality? What are you looking for as far as fit? And what I mean fit is, are they a nice person to work with? Are they good to be around? What are you looking for as far as like outside thought and talent, right? Get off the idea they have to have a certain amount of blah, so that they can fit your company, right? Like, that doesn't matter. If you don't even use Maya in your company, why is Maya requirement on your website? Like, stop that. Like, just stop it. Mm-hmm.
Just love Maya.
Because that's what everybody else does. It's the right passage, right? Like, yeah.
Well, this has been such a good talk that I forgot to give everyone the 5-minute warning. So we got about a minute and a half left. But as we close out, I want to try and get to some of the questions we missed. There was at least one real quick. Yves Crevichet, a speaker here at GDC Summer, asked, tell me back to what you called like patterns of culture that sort of homogenize studios and teams. She says, what you're calling patterns, I call cultural myths, but you kind of make it sound like hazing. Is hazing like an appropriate way to think about it?
I think there can be versions of hazing. Like, I think sometimes there's people that think you have to go through this so you can feel worthy. And there's unconscious bias, right? And unconscious bias is, hey, we do this thing and you don't want to do it, so you're not going to be included. But they're not doing it to make you feel bad. They just like, you don't want to, they would look at it like you don't want to be included in our thing, right? So we all eat pizza. You don't eat, like I'm a Chicago pizza snob. I come from Chicago, right? So I would never eat California pizza. Like, I would think that's like a sin, right? Yeah. So like, but they're going to like this California pizza spot to eat every Friday, and I'm like, on Fridays I'm like, I would never go to California pizza spot. Like, that's ridiculous. So I don't go, right? And they're like, Carl doesn't want to bond with us, right? Like, I just don't care if California pizza has nothing to do with you, but. Those are things I think that there's like there's unconscious bias that happens, and the bias can over time become exclusionary, right? But I also think she's right. There are kinds of hazing where they want you to go through kind of like the same grit they went through to prove yourself, and that's wrong. That's wrong on every level.
Yeah, I think you're right, Carl. Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been fantastic.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man. All right, y'all. Take it easy. Enjoy the rest of your GDC and have a great evening.
Bye.